Okay, so here we go again. Me posting videos when maybe I should or maybe I shouldn't. Who knows? Okay, so a person or two have asked me about this in years past, and I just kind of dance around it. Mainly because it's very complicated and it's just complicated. And there's really no way to get into all of the complicated. And then a ton of people have never asked me about it, but they've had a lot to say about it, a whole lot to say about it. And many of these people are people I have never met and don't know. But it gets back to me, and they know so many things that they really don't know. And it's very complicated. So, if you're one of those people, or if you've been in the hearing range of some of those people, this is a tiny bit of it, because there's really no way to, in any video, to delve into all of it. So, okay, so I was born in San Antonio in 1970, and um, before I got out of high school, I went to 13 schools in multiple states, mainly because my dad's job transferred us a lot. And so there's really no point in going into all of that, but that's that. And and there was a lot in between. But in the seventh grade, I went to 4 schools in 3 states in 1 year. So that's a lot. But I did it, because that was always the thing. Oh, Angie's a tough kid. Angie can do it. Be a tough kid, So, and if it's your normal, it's your normal. So anyway, so there's that. But I also never lived around extended family. And even when I did, I really didn't. And I mean, to this day, I don't know most of them. So, um, and so my world, I'm an only child, and my world was my two parents. And so my parents were married, I think 19 years, almost 20 years, 19-ish. They got married in 1964, and I think divorced in maybe 1981. Very long divorce, so I'm not really sure the date. But they were married 8 years before they had me. I'm an only child. They had one child before me who was born 6 years into their marriage. So, and, I realize there's a lot of complicated stuff probably, in the background of all of that. But that's the facts. That's the basics. And so we had lived away from anybody that either of my parents were related to for most of my life, up until my parents' divorce. And then suddenly my dad wanted to move back to near his hometown. And so we wound up back in Lubbock a week before I got out of the 6th grade, 2 weeks before I got out of the 6th grade, and the week of my birthday. So I started my very first day of 6th grade, 2 weeks before school got out, with a handful of invitations in my hand to give to all of the kids all of the girls in my 6th grade class to come to my birthday party for a kid they just met on the first day and never knew. So that was not awkward at all. Not necessarily well received by a lot of the parents either. Definitely not well received by the teachers. Teachers do not like transfer students, and they really do not like transfer students coming in the last 2 weeks of school. And I don't care how friendly Texas is, it's not that friendly. They just really didn't like it. So anyway, that's that. That's a long time ago. So the people who've asked about this, or kind of, or said things and didn't ask about it, a lot of these people, have been on the receiving end of like 5th and 6th and 10th and 20th hand gossip. And, I've always said my parents had the worst divorce in all of God's creation. I mean, they played it to the hilt. I'll give them that. But, okay. So I don't even really know where to start on this. But people ask about what is so complicated about my relationship with my dad. Okay, so here's the deal. Apparently, and I heard this many, many years later from him, and I don't know if it's true or not, but apparently at some point in history, there might have been a rumor that there was sexual abuse. Let me just say up front, there absolutely was not ever. So I don't know if that rumor was true. I don't know where it may have come from. I suspect if it did happen, it probably came from my mother's mother, but I don't know. I never heard it. So anyway, if that has ever, hit your ears, just, I'll tell you flat out, it didn't happen. Um, and I don't know if it really was, maybe he just said she said it. Who knows? I honestly don't know. It didn't come from me. I do know that. But my dad did lose custody of me for some very good and significant reasons, which is a lot of why the divorce was so contentious. But here's the thing. We had a really, really great relationship and home life up until that point, I don't know that my parents were ever very lovey-dovey. I remember seeing them kiss each other once in my entire life, and he spent all of his time out of town. Which, if you read Irma Bombeck's books ever, she used to talk. She wrote once, I think, in Life is a Bowl of Cherries, about how when she used to play dolls, she would just throw the daddy doll into the bed because dad's disappeared and went to work. I don't know. I don't know if it was his job or if he just didn't want to be home, or I don't know. But he was out of town a lot. He was out of town and he would come home. So a lot of my world was me and my mom, the kids at school, the kids she babysat, and he'd come home on the weekends. But I remember a lot of good memories. Like, I remember every Sunday morning he would get the comics when we'd printed newspapers and the comics were colorful on Sunday mornings, and he would pull out some silly putty and smash them and make on the comics and make funny faces, and he'd read all the characters in character voices, and he used to take me out to the grocery store in his Triumph and buy rolls of cookie dough and slice them off with his bone-handled pocket knife, and we'd sit in the car and eat cookie dough and not tell my mom. So we had, I think, a good relationship until the divorce. And so a big part of my childhood was like we would have these huge, enormous birthday and Halloween parties. The entire school was invited. The entire grade of my school was invited. So, a couple of hundred kids would be at our house for 3-day weekends twice a year, May and October, for my birthday and Halloween parties. And at the Halloween parties, we watched a lot of horror movies in the basement, Friday the 13th and Freddy Krueger and, whatever was playing in the 70s, because, that's what we did. And the kids who were scared of the scary movies sat upstairs with my mom in the den and watched, Dallas and whatever was going on. Welcome Back, Kotter. What was it back then? And, we rolled down the hill in the backyard and played on the jungle gyms, and Rusty was full of fun games and all kinds of stuff. And my mother loved to bake cookies. And so, we were the party house. I was the only child in a neighborhood full of huge families. So they always made big parties for those events. And so that was my childhood, and was very happy. And here I go again. So this is for the people who have hinted it or asked or had something to say, because this is really hard. So we moved to Lubbock, and my parents moved into the house at 4911 63rd Street, which is across from the mall. And, it was just another move in another neighborhood and another school. And, we were happy and excited. And, I just told them we were going to be grandparents and cousins. And, they were happy to come home. And my bedrooms were on one side of the house. I had two. And there was a great room in the middle with the kitchen we say great room in Texas. It was like a huge living room. And my parents' room was on the other side of the house. And so it's a new house. And new houses have new sounds and new, new environment. Things aren't always exactly the same. And so we go to bed at night, and I would hear this knocking at my window, which I was on the other side of the house all by myself, and it was new, and I was 11, and I was scared. Think about this. This is this hard this many years later. So for all the people who like to spread all this gossip, this hurts. And it hurts so bad. And it has hurt for so many years. And it's not what anybody ever said. And nobody ever asked. But I would hear these knocks at my window. Or I would hear these strange sounds, and this window faced the backyard. And I would get scared. And so I go flying across the house to my parents' room and tell my dad. Because if you're a little girl and you came from a safe environment and you came from a healthy family, which at that point it had always been, you go tell your dad if you were scared. And so that's what I did. And that's happened many times. It didn't happen once. It happened many, many times. And he would go out in the backyard. He'd get out of bed. Him and my mom would be in bed. And he would go out in the backyard. And he wouldn't come back for the longest time. And when he did come back, he would be enraged. He would be so mad. But he wouldn't be mad at what was outside. He would be mad at what was inside, which was me and my mom. We only lived there from May to November because my mom and I left. And this all went to court. And I even went to a court-ordered psychiatrist. We all did because of this stuff. But he would... One night he held my mom at gunpoint all night long, screaming that he was going to kill her. Well, I was across the bedroom in my house, in my bedroom. I had a Mickey Mouse phone by my bed, but I was terrified to use it because I had always been told that if I ever said anything, if I ever told the authorities, if I ever hinted to anybody that anything wrong was going on, I was told that they would take me away and I would never see my parents again, so I couldn't say it. I couldn't tell anybody. And so I laid in bed all night, worried that he killed my mother, and it was a school night. And shaking. I was shaking so hard, and I couldn't cry because I couldn't have him hear me. And I was afraid to call the police because I was afraid they'd take me away, and I was afraid if they showed up that he would shoot her. And so finally I heard the garage door slam, and I thought he left. And I crept across the house to see if she was dead, and she wasn't. But she made me go to school that day. Because we couldn't let anybody know that anything was wrong. Because of what he might do, or what they might do, or what might happen to me, or what might happen to us, or, you know. And then another time during this period, and this is May to November, I think it was 1981, he locked us in the house for 3 days, and he kept making us pack our bags to leave, and then threatening to kill us and not let us leave, and then making us pack our bags and unpack our bags, and trying to decide if he was going to kill us or kick us out. And this went on for 3 whole days. And, you know, in the middle of this, we're having birthday parties, and we're showing up at the block parties, and families coming in and out, and Not during that 3 days, but and I was so scared that time that he was going to kill us both that I had this old cassette tape recorder, and I hid it behind the door of my bedroom, which was near my other bedroom, which was near the kitchen, which is where he was screaming at one point. And I was trying to record him, but of course it didn't make a very good recording. But I did get a recording of it. But anyway, the knocking at the door window at my night happened consistently during this time. And it was the married next door neighbor who was booty calling my dad. And she lived next door, and she had 2 kids. She had a daughter 6 months younger than me, who was not invited to my parties because she was in the grade below me, and I'd always only invited kids in my grade. But Rusty made a big deal about it and said that I just wasn't inviting her because, I was being mean to this woman's kids, which is not true. The policy in the house was always you only invite the people in your grade. My mother didn't want to babysit all the siblings. And so, anyway, it all created fuel for what became a lifetime of just stuff. But the married next door neighbor next door, she lived in a house like ours. She had a really old Dodge car, really old. It was her high school car, and it was old when it was in high school. Had this dragon tape on it. It barely ran. It was always not working. And had one of those old leather tops that was falling off. It was not a classic car it would be now, but it was, it was a train wreck. And my parents had new cars, and my parents had new furniture, and they were in a better financial position. It appeared. I don't know, I'm in their bank, but by appearances. And truthfully, I was 11. What the fuck did I know? But in her house, their house, because she was married and had 2 kids, was furnished with old furniture from like the furniture that you get at the secondhand stores after motels go out of business. It's old motel furniture. And I mean, she was married, and in my opinion, she was looking for an upgrade. But she was the woman knocking at my window at night. And she got a divorce, and my parents got a divorce, and my dad married her. And they've been married all these years. And so we don't have a great relationship, but that's not all of it. He did not have custody because of all the guns and all of the threats and all of the inflamed things that happened in the house and other things from years before. He didn't have custody. He didn't have visiting rights. That was court ordered by a judge. He was not a victim of anything other than his own behavior and his own choices. And he did have to pay child support because that's just how life goes, But he was not, it wasn't a shotgun wedding. They were married 8 years before I was born. And they were married almost 20 years, like 19 years. So anyway, excuse me. So anyway. My mom did not grow up with a father. And that's all complicated. And some of you know a lot of that story, and some of you may not, but let's just say it's complicated. And it's a whole other situation that is another kind of trauma. But anyway, she felt like, my mother, Bonnie, felt like that I needed to have a relationship with my dad. And so she would encourage me to go see him after the divorce, but I could go at my own will and discretion. because he had no court authorized visitation at all, none. And so the first few times I went to go visit him on the weekends, which is 2 hours away, we moved 2 hours away. The first few times I went to go visit him on the weekend, I don't think him and Judy were married yet, but she was always there. And so he would leave town because he didn't want to be around me, or he didn't want the drama with her of me being around, whatever it was, because we'd always had a great relationship. I mean, we had, up until that point, other than these ugly events, which had a lot to do with the third party. But up until that point, every Sunday morning, he would get up and read the comics and character voices and do the silly putty on the comic strips. And he would take me to get cookie dough, and he would take me to buy balloons and to buy toys. And we didn't have a bad relationship ever until this happened. And so I've said this a lot, that this was during the days of Dallas and Dynasty in particular, I think. Because he used to, in these rages and fits that he was throwing during this May to November period in 1981, he would want my mother to get out in the yard and have a fist fight with Judy, the way Joan Collins and who was it, Crystal, and whoever the characters were in Dynasty, got in the fight in the fountain. And he would pit me and Judy's daughter against each other to try to get fights. This is narcissistic behavior. Of course, when I was 11, I didn't know that. But this is classic narcissistic behavior. This is somebody who has a psychological issue with wanting people to compete for their affection, and then them withholding that affection to get you to compete harder for their affection. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't know if it's mental illness or if it's just a characteristic. I don't know. But this is what the behavior came from. And so, when you're in this kind of situation, there are no relationships ever formed. And the relationships that had been formed get completely destroyed. And so I would go home from these visits and I would be upset, and if I was stuck with Judy and her kids all weekend, I'd be really upset because, I went to see my dad. I didn't go to see the woman who I did not know, but who essentially destroyed my home life and my childhood, and so, and then we were being pitted in this situation on top of that. So there was no possibility of anything good ever coming of this, and nothing good ever did. So anyway, so my visits became fewer and fewer because they weren't court ordered. I didn't have to go and I wasn't welcome. But anyway, my mom got on Rusty's case and said, hey, she went over there to see you, not the neighborhood fuck. Let's just say, call it what it is. And so he would stay home when I would come, because she's still thinking, you got to have a relationship with your dad. And so she would encourage me to go see him, 1 week in a month, something, just, to consistently have some sort of relationship. And so then he started staying around. And mind you, at this point, because during the divorce, my mother had moved us into her mother's house. And that was a terrible situation. I was an 11-year-old who developed really early. I had big boobs in the 4th grade. And her mother, for whatever reason, because she'd always been my favorite grandmother, but for whatever reason at the same time, she decided to chase me around the house pinching my boobs. So if I was ever sexually assaulted or harassed, it was by my grandmother. And I would tell my mother, and she would blame my dad for calling the grandmother a lesbian, which I don't know if she was a lesbian, but she was, I think she didn't want me and my mom in her house, and she thought if she harassed the crap out of me, we'd leave. And so anyway, but that got me in more trouble. So I don't have a lot of respect for my mother on that part. But anyway, so I begged my mother to get an apartment. She got this little tiny apartment in the neighborhood with no kids. And she was not home 7 days a week. She says she worked from 5 in the morning till midnight. You know, I saw her on Sunday afternoons. So from like 11 to 15, when I got my driver's license, I was locked in this apartment alone every day. Was not allowed to leave the house. There were no kids to invite over. They wouldn't have been allowed to come in the house without her there anyway. And I was alone. You know, my poodle Cuckoo died during that time, and my mom said she probably died of loneliness, and she probably did. So that's the situation I was in from 11 to 15, and then these visits with my dad. And so anyway, so she called my dad and she said, hey, you really got to be there, she's coming to see you, not the neighborhood fuck. And so then he would show up. And so I would hear, he'd say, oh, I took the kids to go to go-karts, and I took the kids to go play miniature golf, and I took the kids, and this is Judy's kids, this isn't me, because I didn't live there. But I kind of get excited and think, oh good, he's going to go take me to go do go-karts and play miniature golf and do these things, because I used to be a kid, I was 11, but I'd like lost that childhood and lost that joy. I didn't have friends. I didn't have anybody to go anywhere. And I had a mother who was never home. And so I would kind of look forward to thinking, oh, I'm going to get to go to go-karts or something. And we'd get there. And he and Judy were in this huge fight in the background over, they had paid child support, so they shouldn't have to pay for me to do go-karts. And my mother didn't send me with money. And, and I eat vegetables. He hates me to this day because I eat vegetables, and they don't eat vegetables. So, I go home hungry, after 2 or 3 days. And all the other kids would be moping and sad because I showed up. I pooped the party. I showed up with no money, so they couldn't go to go-karts because, but they could do it when I wasn't there. Life was so fun when I wasn't there, So this is how this relationship got destroyed. This is the early phases of how this relationship got destroyed. And when I was 15, I went to work. And I was in a shitty school. I say to this day that I should have never even gone to school after we moved to New Mexico, because there was no education in it. I spent 2 hours a day mending sweaty football jerseys for the football team in my home ec classes. I spent another 2 hours a day in an art class that had no funding because we had to give all of our funding to the football team because 12 boys in the school have to play football. And then I spent all my after school hours raising money selling t-shirts for the fucking football team. And then I went to my jobs, which were about 40 hours a week from the time I was 15 years old on. So, and I never to this day, not then, never once complained about work. I always grew up with a lot of joy about getting to work and getting to earn money. And, I thought I would go to college and have a degree. And, I never thought it would not work. I never thought I didn't want to work. And so it was never part of the plan, not in my head. It never was. I never imagined not working. And so then my mother bought me a car when I was 15. She bought me a new car because she thought it was safer. And of course, it took child support to pay the payments and the insurance and all that stuff. And so I had grown up in this house where my dad had a new car every year because the company got him a new car every year. I never knew you didn't get a new car every year. And so I was working, and when I was 17, I thought I'm going to trade this car in and get a Fiero, which was like the cool thing to have at that time. And so I did, and my mom called my dad and said, you're going to have to come co-sign the loan for her because they're not going to give her a loan. She's only 17 years old. And he did. And I have to say, and I would have said this 6 months after I did it, that it was the absolutely stupidest decision I had ever made up until that point. But nobody told me not to. I was not a kid who had any guidance. It was like, you want to get a new car? Go get a new car, but you got to make the payments. And so it was not a well thought out decision, but it created so much hostility because my then stepmother, and by the way, when they got married, mind you, my mother, I was home alone 6.5 days a week, couldn't leave the house, right? So I came home from school one day and I was like 12 years old because they got married right away. I came home from school one day and of course I was there alone. Answering machine's blinking. And so I checked the message on the answering machine. And my dad says, "Hey, Angie, me and Judy got married. I've got a new family now. So I hope you have a nice life." That's how I figured this out. And I was crushed. I was devastated. I had, in 1 year, been dragged through 4 school systems in 3 states. My parents' divorce just imploded in the middle of my life. I started a school where the girls were horrible and mean to me. And I would sit in the bathroom and cry every day at lunch because I was so sad and miserable. And now we would say bullied. But back then we didn't have those words. And then I come home and get a message like this. And I was never welcome to come visit because I came without money to do go-karts and to buy vegetables and, God forbid, And so and it just got progressively worse. So anyway, I get this car. And I shouldn't have done it, but nobody told me not to. Nobody really explained to me what I was getting myself into, and I was clueless. I didn't know. And so I get this car, and it created so much hostility. Judy still, I think, had the old Dodge, which was a piece of crap, or she may have graduated to the Nissan Maxima station wagon, which was a bigger piece of crap and equally old. But she was furious, and she wasn't making the payments on it. My mother had bought the yellow car. Rusty didn't co-sign it. Rusty didn't pay the insurance on it. Rusty didn't, it wasn't his deal. She bought it. The only thing he had to do with it was she called him and said, what would be the safest car for her to have that's affordable? And then she went and found it, and it was yellow. It was my favorite color, and that's how it came about. But he didn't pay for it. He didn't sign the papers on it, except he thinks because he paid the child support, he bought the car. But that's not necessarily entirely how that works. So anyway, I traded that car in for the down payment. He co-signed the loan on the Fiero, and Judy was fuming and furious, and that would have been a great opportunity for any adult in the room to have said, this is a stupid decision. But, nobody did. Nobody said anything, And so, I worked 40 hours. I did the best I could with what I had. But by the time I got out of high school, and, it created all this hostility. It just created so much hostility. But the payments were made until about the time I got out of high school. And the house my mother bought burned, and we were just having, the child supported ended, jobs imploded. It was a time when everything fell apart for whatever reason, and I got behind and I got in trouble. And one day Rusty showed up in our front yard, threw a brick through the window, and drove off in my car. And he's bitched about it for years, that it wasn't clean when he picked it up, and that the headlight wasn't working when he picked it up, and shit, the house had burned. We'd lost half of everything we owned. We had a lot of crap going on, and the car being polished in the front yard was not the biggest priority. But anyway, it's been something to bitch about for 40 fucking years. And so, sometime after that, my mom had a little Jimmy, if you remember those. It's like a little SUV. And I had graduated high school and I already had the sculpture going, and we were kind of trying to figure out this business that is this business now. And so we were making trips, selling stuff and coming home. And we had come home from a trip and we were going out the next morning to pay bills, because this is before the internet. Nothing's paid, on the internet like it is now. We had to physically write checks and go drop them in the drop boxes around town for the electric and the gas and the cable and the insurance and the rent. Well, not the rent, because that was a mortgage by then, but all the stuff. And so we'd been driving all night, just like I do now. Probably showed up at 4 a.m, slept about 4 hours, got up to make sure all the bills were paid at like by 8, because we came in with money. First thing you do is pay the bills. And it was Bonnie's car. It was in her name. She was in the passenger seat. I was driving, and I backed out of the driveway, stone cold sober. I never had a drink of alcohol until I was like 36 years old, 32 maybe. I had a glass of wine. Still don't drink alcohol much, and so backed out of the driveway, but probably have sleep. I don't know. I did not see a car, and we're in our neighborhood. This is not like a big high traffic area. This is our little neighborhood. Back out of the driveway, and this girl that I went to school with, whose dad was an insurance agent in town, had a Subaru station wagon with a roll bar bumper on it that her dad had put on it in high school when I was still in school with her, because she had so many accidents in that car that he put a roll bar bumper on it. Anyway, I backed out of the driveway and she came flying down our street. She didn't even live anywhere in our neighborhood, so I can't even imagine why she was there. But anyway, she came flying down our street at like 50 miles an hour in what was a 20-mile-an-hour zone, and just clipped the bumper of this car I was driving as I backed out of the driveway. She was kind of in my blind spot, so I didn't see her. And when she did that, this is a Jimmy, so they're kind of top heavy. She hit us with such force that the vehicle rolled into the neighbor's lawn across the street. And so the fire crews had to come, and the tow trucks had to come, and all the stuff. And, nobody was hurt, but it was a terrible accident. Well, the insurance was behind on that car by hours, because we had come into town. It was due the day before, and we were going to make the payments. It was my mother's car. It was in her name. It was not in my name, but I was driving it. And for whatever reason, when it went to court, they suspended both of our driver's licenses for 14 years. No alcohol involved, no drugs involved. No, nothing other than I was backing out of the driveway and somebody hit me. But we both got our driver's licenses pulled for 14 years. So I was like 19 years old at that time. So I would be 34 years old before I could legally drive again. It was case number 7717 under the New Mexico Attorney General's files. And his name at that time was Jacob Carrion. And we didn't have the money to pay the judgment to get it fixed. And we had no way to work because we had no way to drive. And so, we damn near starved to death. And I'm not kidding you. We were walking around town groveling for money and trying to scavenge $1 for $1 loaf of day-old bread a day to keep going. It was not pretty. And call my dad for help, and of course he was his asshole self, and I mean he was the old waving the guns around while he's fucking the neighbor kind of asshole self, which is pretty much what he's been to me in all the years since. So for all the people who think that my mother stole me away and stole this relationship from him, that's not how that happened. It's just that anytime he needed to show up, it was a reason to be an asshole. And I don't know where it happened. I don't know if watching Dynasty in Dallas in 1980 just flipped something in his brain. I don't know what it was. I really don't. I don't know if it was, um, the creature next door, or what. Um, you know, I have friends on Facebook who have daughters. I have friends on Facebook who have lost daughters who have passed away, and they are devastated. They're absolutely devastated, more than one. And I am the only child of this man who treats me terribly, apparently to impress this woman. I don't know. I don't get it. And this is classic narcissistic behavior, where these people who have this sort of disorder sort of twist everything to where they're the victim while they're doing these atrocious things that they get to talk about and sort of twist around and make themselves popular. So they gain all of this acclaim and all of this admiration and all of this sympathy for a situation they perpetuated themselves. And so we left, you know. I mean, we had to make a living. We left. You know, fuck the driver's license, fuck the insurance. We left. And, you know, we just kept going. And so we were gone for 19 months. And then we got trapped by another relative in another state who thought she was just real cute. But she wanted to be popular with this narcissist who started this whole thing. And she was a narcissist too. And so we got stranded again for 4.5 years. So the years that I should have been in college, should have been getting some kind of education, should have had some freedom to work and date and have a social life and do all these things, I was trapped in this apartment with my mother in Stillwater, Oklahoma for 4.5 years. And I was cleaning apartments. It was a college apartment complex, and so I was scrubbing toilets and hanging wallpaper and cleaning flower beds and sweeping the parking lot and shoveling snow and all these things. And my mother at that time, and I'm not going to go into this because this will make this so much more complicated, but my mother at that time, and I think it was caused from her feeling so confined in this place, because we were 14 miles from a Walmart where we were, round trip, 7 miles back. And so we were trapped. Like, there was no way to get anywhere. No way to drive, because we were going to be arrested if we, you know, left the property. And at the mercy of this complex, who paid us absolutely nothing because they knew we had no way out. So it was basically, you know, an enslavement situation. And the woman we worked for actually referred to us as her slaves. She used that word. And so anyway, so 4.5 years of this, we thought, we've got to get out of this. And that woman was an alcoholic. And so we made a deal with her to start hanging wallpaper in 400 units of this apartment complex at night, after we scrubbed my mother worked in the office, but I scrubbed toilets and did all this other stuff. And so we'd hang wallpaper at night, but she would save the money and put it into a fund that they would deduct for our rent. So we never actually saw money. It just went into rent. And so that fund grew and grew and grew, and this woman was an alcoholic, and she wasn't keeping up with it. And so we got a hold of the owner of the property one day, who was privy to all this, but also not paying attention. And 4 years into it, we had enough money for a down payment for a car. Still no driver's license, but we had a down payment for a car. And so we just made it clear to him that he pretty much had to come up with the money, because what they were doing was illegal. And so they came up with the money that they owed us, and we called a car dealership in Oklahoma City, and the salesman drove us out a car, and we got the fuck out of there. And which any sane person would do. But small towns are very corrupt. So, you know, this is actually another form of human trafficking. It's just, you know, a couple of white girls, but it happens. And so we, and the whole time calling my dad saying, can you please do anything to help us? I mean, the judgment was like $3,000. It was a tiny amount of money when you consider you know, his net worth. And he wouldn't do it. He loved having us, you know, dangling over fire, kind of like being held at gunpoint. And so we left, and we were gone that time for, I don't know, 2.5 or 3 years, living in hotels, selling crafts, sewing machine in the back of the car, and carload of stuff we made, and we just drove and sold. And we went all the way to the East Coast and the Southeast and the Midwest, and we got scared to death in Alabama when we ran into some people from the KKK. We didn't know that was like a real thing anymore. It is. And scared us sideways. And so we drove to Omaha, and we were there for a few years. And anyway, then California and all that. So, but anyway, so for all the people who have things to say about this, and there's so much more, there's so much more, you know, it's all been incredibly painful. So all the things you say could never measure up to the actual truth and core of so much of this pain. You know, and my mother has all this other stuff too, which is also incredibly painful. I was trapped with her in this apartment complex for 4.5 years while she was having constant, daily, hours-long active flashbacks of the sexual abuse she went through as a child. 4.5 years of this, and these flashbacks went on for years. And they altered her state. And so that's painful too. And there's so much more. But all of the years of this, from the time I was like 11 years old on, it was like a sudden, shocking, catastrophic death of my entire family. Because they were the only family I really knew. And it was devastating. But it was not like, oh, grandma died, let's go have a funeral. It's gone on for decades. I have one photo of me and my parents together that was ever made. And I was 2 years old. And it was the only one. All the birthdays, countless birthdays that were just missed. All the Christmases, decades of them that nobody acknowledged. Graduation, nobody could sit through a meal together. It was a big fight. Still a big fight. There has not been a single happy event that is memorable. So it's been like this lifetime of death that just keeps crashing down all the time. And there's never a day, ever, in all these years, excuse me, I'm sorry, but there is never a day in all of these years that there's just been a good day. My dad thinks it's his job to get up every morning and say happy birthday to all the people on Facebook. But for all of you people who know him, has he ever said happy birthday to me? Never. And truthfully, my mother's an asshole on birthdays too. And Christmas, no different, you know. And you just, I think that's why I loved California so much, because it just went in your face. You didn't see it. And so you didn't have to feel the sorrow of being left out, because it just wasn't there. So, you know, another day. And always sunshine. But it's been like the longest, most agonizing death. And, you know, and it's a death you kind of look forward to at some point. But Facebook had a lot to do with me sort of normalizing what is normal again. All these years on Facebook. And it's so funny because I was the person, I never wanted a cell phone ever. I was the last person to get one. And then when smartphones came out, I wouldn't have one. I had the money for one, but I wouldn't get one because I didn't want to be attached to it. But then one day I was on the East Coast and I couldn't find anybody who sold a paper map, and I had to go get an iPhone so I could have a map app on my phone. That's why I have an iPhone. And then my friend from school, you know, was living in Texas when I was in California, and she's like, you got to get on MySpace and Facebook and all this stuff. And I thought it was the stupidest thing, but I did. But it was Facebook that normalized so much stuff for me because it had all disappeared. It all disappeared, you know, at that time. And if anything, you know, when I was a kid, if anything ever came up, it was, well, you know, well, Giz, nobody likes you. This is what I hear. Well, Giz, nobody likes you. Or in recent years, the last time I saw my dad, I, I have tried, you know, I have tried and tried. 8 years ago, he said, hey, move back here. I want to be your friend. He will not talk to me. He will not come see me. He invited me out to dinner once because he was coming through Amarillo and I was in Amarillo. And I mean, it's not like he's very far away. He's got a shop over there, right? And I had begged and begged, he never would come. And he's like, hey, meet me over here for lunch. Well, of course, Judy's always there. I have never seen him once, ever, since I got out of high school, that she was not with him. He is not allowed. He's not allowed. So who wears the pants in the family? He's not allowed to see me alone without her. And she's always this parrot in his, you know, she's like the hand up the puppet's mouth. And so she tells him what to say to me. And so we showed up in this restaurant and she's like, tell her she's fat, tell her she's fat. And so he's like, and he, very crowded restaurant, and he very loudly made a big scene telling me what a fat, retarded loser I am. And he uses those words. And because she's sitting here in her voice telling him, say, tell her she's fat, tell her she's fat, tell her she's retarded, tell her she's retarded, you know, and he does it. Why? You know, and he is a fully formed adult, but he does this stuff. And I know better, but it still hurts when it's from somebody you just really wish to loved you and they don't. So, you know, you just, what do? You live a parallel existence because it's really the only way through it. So there's so much. And I mean, I've said plenty of things too, but some very well-earned things. You've got to remember, these were adults who did this to an 11-year-old. And it's shameful. But what is more shameful than that are people in this broader, wider community who, for sport, for entertainment, for lack of anything else to do, sort of take things and add on to them and make them bigger and make them something they're not and turn them into what they're not. And it's just shameful. And then the other thing that is really shameful, and this goes back to this part of the world, but, you know, I realize churches are not-for-profit organizations and they like to raise money. And I raised money, a lot of money, for not-for-profit theaters, which are not churches, but, you know, they're all the same thing when it comes to the government. I raised a lot of money for them. So I understand the whole fundraising gig. And I understand why churches really like to cater to people with money. Because if you're in theater and you're raising money, you want to cater to the people who are going to give you the big donations or, you know, have the right connections or something that's going to further the cause of the organization. Believe me, I get it. I worked in that field for many years and excelled at it exceptionally well. But some of you people have a lot of nerve worshiping false gods and telling other people where to find Jesus. I'm just telling you, You really need to think that over. Yeah.